Hello there ladies and gentlemen, I'm Paul TX141 Walsh, welcoming you to an all new World of Warships gameplay today on our channel. In this episode I'm sailing out in the Tier 3 French cruiser known as the Friant in a Tier 4 standard battle on the map Big Race. The focus of today's gameplay is for me to outline why I personally feel the Freon is one of the best low tier cruisers in the game if you're looking as a newer player in particular to understand the basics of cruiser play, and this will benefit you all the way up into the higher tiers. Because the Freon embodies the concept of versatility and knowing when to use her trait to her advantage in given circumstances. Because cruiser gameplay in general does not embody one style of play, it's incredibly flexible as we're about to see. Now we begin by noting that my game plan will be to go southwest in towards Destroyer Corner as I call it, so because that's where most of the destroyers will go on Big Race. Now that's not the main reason for my going there, but instead it's the fact that there's a carrier aside. Now what you have to respect is that whilst at Tier 3 the AA suites of cruisers are typically rather poor, and in general they are for ships at Tier 3, you will get cruisers that have weaker AA than other cruisers you go up the tier. So I'm embodying that principle here to appreciate, okay, I haven't got the AA to bring down a Langley's planes too easily, so how can I get around that? Well, option number one is I sail with friendly ships, and I'm about to do so, conferring my AA to them and vice versa, them conferring their AA to support me. But more importantly, if I can get myself close to a landmass, then that means that the enemy carriers in this case will not be able to drop me as easily, because if I'm close enough, even if they had the ability to manual drop, which they only get at Tier 6 upwards, they would not be able to do so because it's so close to my ship, either landmass, and instead they have to sail all the way round the ship towards the southern side in the case of landmass coming up on my starboard side right now, in order to be able to successfully drop on me. And therefore this means they have to spend more time within my AA shroud, which extends out to 4 kilometers, or damage per second of 13. Alternatively, the short range is 1.2 kilometers, damage per second of 6, and it means they've also got to carry through the shrouds of my friendly ships around me, such as the G101s, the Karlsruhe, the Danae, the Farang, and the Nassau right off towards the eastern side. As we make our way forward here, we act as a friendly deterrent, either preventing the enemy bombers from potentially wanting to come in to attack our ships. Well, that's what we could do as we're going up the tiers and AA gets stronger. But now as we cut across the opening between the islands, what we can see is we were spotted twice, and I'm reading this as key information. Note the fact that I had decided to turn to the left slightly when I was spotted the first time. This was not by coincidence, this was to see whether a second destroyer was coming behind the first, and we can see that a Wix and an Izakazi were spotted, and I know there must have been two because the second time I was spotted, the angle of spotting was further north than the first spotting point, meaning that there was a tailing destroyer. Now with the dive bombers over our friendly ships, here we can see our AA going to town, what it can do against the dive bombers, and we're now into a position where we can start to move closer to the destroyers. Now we need to get closer because the issue of our 139mm cannon batteries, of which we have 4 pairings, ABXY, and we'll come back to this and why this is important very shortly, is because at longer ranges against destroyers, which are small and nimble ships, opening fire with guns with low muzzle velocities or rainbow shell arcs is what we're seeing here, with our initial muzzle velocity of high explosive 840 meters per second and with armor piercing 790 meters per second, is that only when we get close can we be truly accurate. And against the Izakazi there we picked up a nice salvo with a good number of shells hitting as we closed the distance. Now we're not going to rush into range, simply because what we have to consider at the end of the day is that destroyers have lethal torpedoes, and whilst we are manoeuvrable, we're not as manoeuvrable as a destroyer, although it is worth noting that we have a top speed of 30 knots and a rudder shift of 6 seconds. Add to that the 560 meter turn circle radius, and it means we can get to say 4 to 5 kilometers from a destroyer and feel comfortable that we'll be able to dodge the torpedoes, or we can plan ahead and go bow towards the torpedoes or angle towards them before we spot them. Because remember, we do not have hydroacoustic search currently, but if we did, we could have it up in order to spot the torpedoes a little earlier. And I get the feeling our Karlsruhe, which does get the hydroacoustic search at Tier 4, the German cruiser, is able to see those torpedoes with that consumable active much more easily than we can. So instead what we're going to do, we're going to use our friendly cruiser here to spot the destroyers for us, and as soon as they do, our guns are ready to fire, and it means we can open up with a full salvo and do big damage. Because remember, destroyers are the squishiest ships in game technically in terms of relative health pools, and we knocked off a good meaty 3000 from that Zaislav, and with their smoke pretty much dissipating at this point, they're going to creep out of it, and we can finish them off with another 1500 damage salvo. And that's one destroyer already out the game. And you can see I'm not over committing to pushing the destroyers, because in doing so what it means is I expose myself to being torpedo rushed or suicide rushed by a destroyer. I would kill them, but then they'd launch all their torpedoes and kill me off. So instead I'm sitting at a nice distance of 5 to 7 kilometers, just constantly opening fire with our 10.8 second reload thanks to basic firing training and the tier 3 captain skill, and by dumping out the rounds continuously we can cause these destroyers a problem. And you'll note that I switched my aim towards the wicks rather than the Izokazi because we've got two G101s who are closing down on the Izokazi. So I'd rather create a pincer against this American destroyer, helping out our Pan-Asian destroyer towards their southeast, our Friant, in the process. Because we can help to finish off this wicks rather rapidly. Although we only scored one hit there, we didn't anticipate the fact their engine had been knocked out and therefore their velocity had bled so much. We thought they may have had last stand. But now that they've repaired their engine, we can start to hit them again. And whilst we are getting some hits, not as many as previously, it happens every so often, natural dispersion of the guns, but we will help bring down this American destroyer over time. Keeping in mind that our raw high explosive maximum damage is 2000 and we have an 8% fire chance without Demolition Expert or any flags equipped. Now, so at this point, as we finish off the wicks for our second kill, we move into open water combat. And this is where I need to talk about the Friant's characteristics a little bit more. Note that she has centerline mounted turrets. All of her turrets are centerline mounted. They take a long time to turn, 25.7 seconds in order to turn 180 degrees, but the important thing is she can turn all of her guns to bear on a target so long as she's got the target within her firing arcs. Compared to a good number of cruisers at her tier all the way up to tier 5, which will have guns mounted on the side of the ship and unable to engage around the entirety of the ship effectively, minus the very limited angle at certain points where they can't shoot beyond the, say, the smokestacks of the ship. Now what this means in turns is, with a Freon, you start to learn the trade of knowing where to angle your guns for the next engagement. And what you can see here is I'm getting ready to fire my guns off of what is first my starboard side because I want to focus on the Friant, but at the same time I want to keep my distance from the battleships that are coming down from the northeastern corner of the map. I want to assist in doing some damage to this enemy destroyer. Now you see I'm using the torpedo lead indicator, something that cruisers can do especially, in order to judge how fast that destroyer is going as they take out, well, it looks as though they assist in taking out our friendly G101 and our other G101 is not faring too well. And we can see that the enemy destroyer has come to pretty much a complete standstill. It's almost coming to one, so we'll try to get some more hits on them. And we do get a nice 2 there, that's 1,500 damage almost, and that's health they could do with, as we've got a sizable health pool by comparison. Now that they're picking up some speed and we're at the longer distance, we can see that our ability to hit this destroyer becomes weaker over time, and they can use their concealment to hide themselves from us very shortly. Now, knowing that I can no longer engage this destroyer anymore, I'm starting to rotate the guns onto the port side of the ship, and I'm turning myself to engage the enemy ships that have come down from the northeast, particularly the enemy cruiser, the Duguay-Tuan, the tier 4 French cruiser, the one that follows this. Now the reason I want to take this cruiser out is because then I can eliminate the ship that's able to kite against me. And this is where we come into open water kiting, something that cruisers do very effectively. In the fact that they have the speed in order to pull the distance from battleships. Unfortunately we take some significant high explosive damage from the Bellerophon there. But they have the speed that if they keep their distance and wiggle their aft appropriately, and we talked about our rudder shift earlier being only 6 seconds, and that's going to work very well. It means that in these longer distance engagements, battleships will find it harder to hit the target. But we need this enemy cruiser out of the way because otherwise they could exploit those tactics against us as we try to push forward. Because it's easier in a cruiser generally, as we saw in our gameplay feature in the shores only a couple of weeks ago, linked in the top right corner of our screen as displayed now, it's easier typically in a cruiser to be fighting from a defensive stance, i.e. pulling back and kiting, than it is from fighting an offensive stance, chasing a foe that's just as manoeuvrable as you. As we open fire again on the enemy cruiser, we're trying to get them out as quickly as possible, but at the same time note how I'm avoiding sailing towards the battleships too closely. I am sailing towards them relatively at the moment, but not to the point I'm going directly at them, because if I was to do that, I'd be exposed to potentially being ripped apart. We have lost our engine, and we're waiting for it to come back online, and we have taken considerable high explosive damage from the Bellerophon at this point. But it looks as though the enemy cruiser is about to fall under our salvo, and our engine's now back up, thanks to the fact we've got our damage control party around. And with the enemy cruiser now eliminated from the game thanks to the fire we set, we can now start to think about pulling our distance from our opposition. Now this is where we go from open water back into close quarters hiding behind land masses. And in the meantime we can start to frustrate our opponents in their battleships because they do not have the gun arcs to shoot over the land masses typically unless they go to extreme ranges. Now as we angle away, we note the torpedoes coming in from the enemy destroyer, the deep water torpedoes, but more importantly now we're behind the landmass, we can switch back towards the close range destroyer engagement. Because what I'm thinking about here is how can I potentially get that destroyer out of the game. And on top of that, looking at the minimap, I've got 2 friendly ships still available to me, but they're a long way away, so I need to buy time for myself. Because remember, a cruiser is not the strongest ship that's available as a class. Battleships are the strongest. Now there are some cruisers you go up which will act as sort of pocket battleships in the way they've got a lot of armour, the heavy cruisers, particularly as you go to higher and higher tiers in the German line for example, all the way up to the Hindenburg at tier 10. But in the case of the Freon, what we find is her armour profile is incredibly weak, whereby she's got a maximum amount of armour of 30mm, and to give you an idea in terms of citadel armour, her citadel rides rather high, and what we'll find is that on the side her citadel is only 10mm thick. But fortunately for her, she does have a torpedo belt, which provides a 7% damage reduction to torpedo damage, and on top of that, that gives her an additional bit of 13mm of armour across the citadel, so it goes up to a maximum of 23. It's not great, and armour piercing from enemy cruisers will do a lot of damage, and here you can see how we're dodging the incoming torpedoes. Remember what I said earlier about keeping a good amount of distance from the destroyer to avoid the torpedoes in time, but not staying too far away not to be able to hit them successfully. And here we use our own torpedoes against the Bellerophon in order to try and score some hits. And this is important what I'm about to do. What you'll notice, I could be opening fire at the Bellerophon at this point, but I'm actually playing some mind games here, in making them wonder when I'm throwing my torpedoes out. Because normally if a cruiser stops firing its guns but it's going to be detected for a long time, then what it's normally doing is it's throwing down its torpedoes. And ours do not have the best of range. They've only got 6km range, but we do get 2 sets aside, which leads up to 4 total sets of triple torpedoes. They can do a maximum of 12,223 damage. We've got an 84 seconds reload, 57 knots speed. We did hit the Bellerophon and we managed to pick up some flooding, but it looks as though they potentially put the flooding out. In fact, note, the flooding's sticking, my apologies, that's working out in our favour for the time being. So our torpedoes can do some damage, but at the same time, by not firing our guns and making it look as though we're getting ready to torpedo, we're encouraging those battleships to pull back, because they may be thinking to themselves, well, I don't remember what range torpedoes that enemy Freon has, so I need to get away from potentially being hit by those torpedoes. And as we start to pull the distance as well, we can go back to opening fire of our guns, and in return trying to set some fires, and here you're going to see the limited armour of the Freon really hurting her, as we get hit at the most obtuse angle and it's an over-penetration. And again, it's rather laughable in the fact that you'll get over-penetrated in the ship just as much as you're going to be citadeled in it by a battleship. You can really expose your broadside, and that's why the forgiving things, let's say, about the ship, you can really expose your broadside and get away with pretty much murder on some occasions, although I wouldn't recommend it. Now, in opening fire on the French battleship, I can't remember how to pronounce the name of, so I'm not going to completely ruin it. We're trying to set some fires and continue to pull the distance. And we can see here another armour piercing salvo comes in, and despite angling against it, we did unfortunately take a shell on the aft of the ship, and that penetrated, doing 2,700 approximately, so that goes to show our lack of armour. But as we pull the distance, the battleship's guns will now become less accurate, and note, by pulling so much distance now, we can actually use our detectability by sea of 11 kilometres or by air of 5.6 kilometres in order to become undetected. That's something we need to do as well. Sometimes we need to take the flak off of ourselves, and by buying our teammates so much time, particularly our Nassau, to move forward towards the enemy battleships, it means they can now be the centre of attention for the time being. And we've also got our friendly Pan-Asian destroyer, the Friant, who's causing some issues as well, throwing out their deep water torpedoes. They're not necessarily going to hit every time, but it's the fact that they're going to be lingering around the battleships at closer ranges and have that constant threat and the ability to lay smoke screens at will. As they do take down the Bellerophon, good job on them. So this is where it all comes together really. Now in the late game, we're just playing the long range engagement. We're trying to set fires every so often with that 8% fire chance. We're a bit of an inconvenience really, because with that cruiser that, despite being on low health, as we pick up our Confederate, we're still able to consistently apply damage over time, set fires which cause the bleed damage, which is very powerful in the long game, and it really works against battleships. And therefore, we can just keep unloading that damage per minute rather than the raw alpha strike of a battleship going toe to toe against an enemy battleship. Now the other thing that is worth noting as we do this as well, by the fact that we've lost so much health, that we did have a starting health pool of 20,300, that by having adrenaline rush in play, which I believe I do have on the ship, we're about to find out, we can see that our reload has dropped dramatically, i.e. it's well below 10.8 seconds as standard now. So this means that we're able to keep dumping out the rounds more and more, and here I decide to experiment a little bit, and this is something else you should be aware of when playing cruisers. Every so often, depending on the calibre of your guns and what you're going up against, armour piercing can yield better results, as we pick up our high calibre. In the case of this enemy battleship, it's not going to be a case that the armour piercing is going to yield greater results, and really I should be switching back, but here I'm trying to experiment on what I can penetrate with the armour piercing shells on this battleship. So I am badly playing at this point, but in the case of seeing what I can do when I play badly. And we're able to get a couple over penetrations, but that battleship's about to fall, and that's the end of the game. Time to take a look at the post-game stats. A rather close game in the end. We can see on the road to victory we notched up 71,378 HP of damage, and we also picked up 2 heroic achievements. The first, the Confederate, for damage at least 6 enemy ships, where damage caused to each ship must exceed 20% of a normal health pool, and we also picked up the High Caliber, for damaging at least 4 enemy ships, where the damage caused must exceed 30% of the total health pool of all the ships in the enemy team. Coming on to the team scores, we can see that we topped our team in terms of base experience earned, picking up 1,334. We can attribute this to the fact that as a cruiser player, we embodied a number of roles as the game progressed, starting off with a closer range destroyer hunter role, where we racked up considerable damage against 3 enemy destroyers, before moving into open waters and therefore flexing our muscle in more of a longer distance kiting role. Over the course of that role, we did at one point have to hide behind a landmass in order to reduce the prioritisation of our ship as the next target on the enemy team, but also buy our teammates time to move up, as we did have our Freon and Friant who were still in the game and just needed time to get back into the battle. And that's as we expressed. Remember, a cruiser is not the heaviest ship in the game and it cannot necessarily do it all on its own. Sometimes it will need its teammates with it in order to help get the job done, and that's why we need to buy the time. And in the process of doing that, they gave us the opportunity to eliminate the remnant enemy destroyer before moving out to long range again and trying to frustrate the enemy battleships by tossing out some torpedoes, which were fortunate enough to notch out a good amount of flooding damage on the Bellerophon, before finally getting out to maximum distance, letting our teammates take up the brunt of the incoming damage, and in return, we just kept at range and continuously threw out shells until the end of the game, using our damage per minute as it had been increased by Adrenaline Rush, the Tier 2 Captain skill, to maximum possible effect. In coming on to our detailed report, we have one key item to note here, and that is in the damage caused by main battery category. You'll see that I overly relied on high explosive to get the job done, and in most cases high explosive was a sensible choice, such as dealing with the destroyers and trying to wear down the battleships over time towards the end. But in the midpoint of the game when going after the Dug Age 1, we could have perhaps used armour piercing on the second broadside they gave us in order to get them out of the game a bit faster, trying to citadel per shell of armour piercing for 2,700. My key point here being that in general with a cruiser, whilst it can be reliable to continuously dump out high explosive shells, if you get your opponents in the right situation, do not forget you have armour piercing available, because regardless of whether you're sailing in a light cruiser or a heavy cruiser, sometimes armour piercing can achieve better results by a considerable margin compared to high explosive, albeit we didn't demonstrate that today. And finally, coming on to our credits and experience earned, we can see that after additions and deductions, we walked away with 173,871 silver credits and 2,062 commander experience. To conclude, hopefully today we have articulated the tactical flexibility that cruisers as a ship class embody in general in World of Warships over the course of a given match, where no other ship class can typically switch its role on the fly as easily as a cruiser, where it be on one side of the spectrum as dedicated anti-aircraft support, through to the other side of the spectrum in terms of long-range high explosive spam in open water against enemy battleships, trying to set them on fire and bleed out their health. In being able to realise this as a cruiser captain, your value to your team and indeed your impact on the game only increases more and more as the game wears on, simply because whereas other ships will be stuck to a particular role, such as battleships being able to push forward and deal massive alpha strike damage, you'll be able to flex your muscle and be able to do some alpha strike damage for armor piercing in a given instance, and in other instances play more conservative and become an ambusher or become that long range irritation to the enemy team. And I think that the Freon in particular at Tier 3 in the French cruiser line embodies this concept of tactical flexibility very well, and if anything I would give her the nickname of Cruiser 101, because once you get used to sailing this ship and the fact that you need to switch your role on the fly to suit the situation, sailing cruisers as you go up the tiers will only get more and more comfortable for you. And so I've been TX141, and if you have enjoyed this video, why not leave a like, comment or subscribe for future World of Warships videos on my channel. And as always, if you're looking to sign up to World of Warships today, you may do so for free. It's a fantastic game, and you can sign up using the link in the description of this video. But until next time, as always, ladies and gentlemen, take care, and fair seas.